It's coming up to 7:15. We've talked in the past on Breakfast about the NHS blood scandal. And now the daughter of a man who died after contracting HIV from NHS blood products says she is one of the forgotten children of that disaster.
Yeah, Katie Walford's dad and thousands of other patients were infected through a contaminated drug or transfusion. Well, Katie's hoping a new report, which comes out today, will finally recognise wider family members for compensation. Rob Sissons reports.
My dad, I remember his smile, and he was a rascal and he was cheeky, and I've learned over the years growing up that he was a flirt and he just loved people.
Katie in Derby lost her dad when she was just 10 years old. David Hatton was only 41. He'd contracted HIV and hepatitis C from NHS contaminated blood products. Factor VIII was given to treat his blood disorder, haemophilia. Katie says there was pressure not to talk about his death.
We were made to believe, and it's quite common that a lot of people were made to believe that they themselves were either a dirty secret or there was a dirty secret in the family, because you just didn't talk about it. It wasn't until I was about 12 years old where I was told the full extent of his health. It's very much always on the surface for me, that experience, having my dad taken away from me far too early.
David was just one of tens of thousands of people infected in the NHS contaminated blood scandal between 1970 and 1991. 4,000 infected people and bereaved partners were given £100,000 interim compensation last year, but it's children and parents who Katie says are among the forgotten ones.
If I was to get some financial compensation from this, I'll be able to start rebuilding the memories in his name, to be able to know that Dad's here for this.
She now hopes a new compensation framework that's expected will finally recognise wider families, the harm, the hurt and ongoing loss.
It's incredibly scary that there are still people who are thinking it's just the way it was at the time, but we're supposed to look back and learn from that, and you're supposed to be able to say, yes, I need to take responsibility, and some people aren't. He would have been an amazing granddad, and that's been taken away from me and my family. It's the recognition and having it documented, validated worldwide, and to make sure that this type of thing does not happen again. And there isn't going to be another 10-year-old out there who's going to have to say goodbye to a dad too soon.
The government says it welcomes the latest interim report from the long-running public inquiry due out later this morning. It says the infected blood scandal should never have happened. Rob Sissons, BBC News, Derby.
Well, we're joined now by Clive Smith, the chair of the Haemophilia Society. Morning to you. A very powerful story from Katie there, who still misses her dad terribly. Every time you hear these stories of blood contamination, it's so shocking. And then there's that secondary layer of shock that it's taken this long for families to get compensation, but particularly extended family, those beyond the partners.
It is, and this is a scandal that spanned 4 decades, and you heard Katie's powerful testimony there. And sadly, her story is repeated across the country. People who've lost their parents, people who've lost their siblings, people who've given up their lives to care for their loved ones and have received no recognition or no compensation. And so that's what we really hope for today with the inquiry report in relation to compensation. The government itself commissioned its own report into compensation, which they've had since March of last year. It made 19 recommendations, and so far only one of them has been actioned. So people like Katie and others across the country are still waiting for the government to do the right thing, and today's the day and the opportunity for them to do that.
Do you expect it to happen then? Do you expect to get a number today?
Well, we don't know exactly what Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the inquiry, is going to say, but we do have the framework for it. So the government need to get on with setting that up. And then in terms of the figures, that needs to come next. But there's absolutely no reason why there should be any delay between now and the inquiry finally reporting later this year. Government simply need to get on with it now. People continue to die. We know that over 400 people have died since the inquiry was announced alone. The figure's more likely to be around 500. So people continue to die today, despite it happening decades ago.
And that's the thing, isn't it? For many of the victims of the contamination and also their families, time is of the essence.
It is. people like Katie will never get that time back with her father, but there are people who are still alive who need some recognition of what they went through. There are people who gave up their jobs. They've had their careers devastated by this, and it would give some people at least an opportunity to create memories with their loved ones, which they can then have to comfort them in their later stages in life. But too many people have lost that opportunity. Justice has been delayed and denied to so many people, sadly.
I remember interviewing another family a couple of years ago, and they were saying, we need to stress it's not about the amount of money, it's about the fact that it happens at all. Is that?
It is. Katie mentioned that right at the end there. It's about recognition. I think this scandal is somewhat different to many other public scandals we know about. So many people don't know about this scandal, and people like Katie, who've led these quiet lives of desperation. She talked about HIV. She talked about the stigma that people still endure, the fact that people still don't talk about their infections, and they simply want some recognition and understanding of their plight and what they've been through.
When you've met with the chair of the inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, has he gone to lengths to explain why it's been such a protracted process? Presumably there's a lot of evidence to oversee. These are big decisions and they have to get it right.
He's been very careful in what he said. He said that he's wanted to conduct this as quickly as possible because he understands that people are dying, but of course he must get it right. So it's better to be right than to be rushed. People have waited decades for this, and what they don't want is a whitewash, of course. Don't think anybody expects that. People have a lot of faith and confidence in Sir Brian and his team, but he certainly had to balance those two competing interests in this inquiry.
We've got a statement here from the government who say that they welcome the publication of this second interim report today. They say it will be extremely helpful to the government in responding to the final report from Sir Brian Langstaff later this year. So do you hope that by the end of this year you will have not just the compensation sorted, but that this whole issue can be dealt with to a way that is satisfactory to Katie and all those other families?
We hope so, but as I say, the government have had the compensation study since March of last year, so they really do need to get on with it. But with all these things, there are always two phases. Firstly, there's the inquiry, and secondly, there's a good government response. Today, the ball will be put in the government's court, and it's down to them to come up with a response that's acceptable to the community.
And you hope that's immediate?
It must be. It can't be. They can't continue to delay. They've delayed for decades. It's time for them to atone for their shameful avoidance of all of this over the decades.
Clive Smith, Chair of the Haemophilia Society, thank you very much indeed for coming to breakfast this morning, and to Katie as well for sharing her story with us. And that is an issue that we will keep an eye on, not just this week, but in the weeks and months ahead.
It is 22 minutes past 7.